All right, welcome. I'll go ahead and get started. We have, it looks like another, I don't know, 30 or so people signed up that haven't jumped on board. So I'll just start talking and hopefully they will get logged in. My name is Christine Keenest. I'm the Employee Relations Manager in HR. So welcome to all of you. Great to see so many of you on, and I'm glad that all of you have shown such interest. We will be holding questions until the end. That doesn't mean you have to think about your question until the end. Please, as questions occur to you, enter them into the chat. Bridget Paris, our Human Resources Director, and Sarah Witherell, one of our Senior Human Resources Generalists, will be monitoring the chat, and they will be gathering up all of your questions and then snagging them at the end and sort of feeding them to me so that I can answer those questions that you all have. So please feel free to ask whatever questions you have. There's a lot going on with collective bargaining, so we're happy to share as much as we can. There's only so much we know at this point. It's continuing to develop before July 1st when it sort of goes live. So there were some regulations that just came out the tail end of last week from the state of Colorado in interpreting a little bit of how they will apply this law. They're just proposed regulations at this point. So there will be a hearing by the state in the middle of April. And then at the end of April, they're collecting all of their comments. I think April 28th is the deadline right around then. So after that, they will be pulling things together and potentially issuing final regulations. We're hoping sometime in May so that we have some time to digest those and essentially get ready and have a little more information for you all. We will be doing a part 2 of this webinar once we have those regulations and know a little bit more of the how-tos, because the state will be filling in all of those details. So more to come, but in the meantime, I will chat us through the county collective bargaining. And so I'll basically kind of set the stage for you and then go from here. So, and I know all of you have varying levels of familiarity with unions and collective bargaining. And so I will do my best to explain that. But again, if you have some questions, you don't understand something that I'm saying, please feel free to throw that in the chat and I'll be happy to answer that later. All right. So I just clicked too far ahead. Anyway, so in 2020, some of you may have heard about this and may be familiar with it. There was a bill passed by the Colorado legislature called the Partnership for Quality Jobs and Services Act, or the PQJSA, that made it possible for state employees to unionize. So in Colorado, prior to 2020, there was just a very small number of public employer unions. They had to be voted on by either the local voters or the boards of county commissioners. And so there were just a couple in Colorado. So the state is what kind of kicked some of this off. So state employees now have the right to join a union. And for the most part, the vast majority of state employees are covered by the Workers for Innovative and New Solutions, or WINS. That's the union representing state workers. So essentially state workers have the opportunity to opt in to the WINS. And then from there in 2022, so last legislative session, last May, the Colorado legislature passed the Collective Bargaining by County Employees Act. That was introduced via Senate bill, and the intent behind it, so it originally included basically all other public employees in Colorado. Through some negotiations, it was pared down significantly, and so currently the law only covers the majority of county employees. It doesn't cover small counties, so anything with a population of under 7,500 is not included, and then cities and counties that are combined are not included. So outside of that, the majority of our Colorado counties are covered by the collective bargaining legislation. And then this legislation officially goes live on July 1st of 2023. So as of July 1st, any county employees covered by this bill have the opportunity to collectively bargain or organize or join unions as part of their employment. All right, so just to start out, we're going to throw out some terms that are in the bill that are important to know. And I will mention that we have a whole website on the HR web page. So if you are not familiar with the web page, it is not on the bulletin board. It's a public-facing web page so that you all are able to see that from anywhere. You can see it from home, you can see it from the office, whatever you need. So it's just larimer.org/HR, and there's a tile under the Employee Relations tab. or there's an employee relations tile. And if you go under there, there's a collective bargaining web page. And that collective bargaining web page has a whole slew of information. It has the terms that we're about to discuss and a whole bunch of other terms, and then a bunch of FAQs. We will be turning some of the questions from the chat into FAQs. So you will probably see some of the questions from this series of webinars turn up on our FAQs on that page. And then just some other resources that can potentially be helpful. So those resources will be on there. There's a link to the Senate bill as well if you're someone that likes to go and read legislation for yourself. Once there are some finalized regulations, we'll put a link to that on there as well. So just know that there are some resources, and you're always welcome to reach out to any of us in HR. You can snag your HR generalist. You can also reach out to me or to Sarah Witherell or Bridget Harris. The three of us are working together on the implementation of this, and the three of us put together this webinar. So lots of resources for you if you have questions or need some help. So we'll start off. What is an employee organization? Most people are probably familiar with this being called a union, but it's essentially a union or an organization of employees that come together. It's a nonprofit organization that engages with the county. So it's an organization that essentially represents or interfaces with the county for a group of employees on behalf of those employees. So they negotiate with the county over any wages, hours, or terms and conditions of employment that matter to that group of employees. So there might be one thing that that group of employees really is passionate about, and that might be the only thing they want to negotiate. Or more commonly, there may be a group of things that they're wishing to negotiate over. So that employee organization represents them in discussing all terms and conditions of their employment. Terms and conditions of employment is very broadly defined. And so it really is anything that impacts your employment. It can be from the way employee discipline is handled, performance evaluations. It can be the hours that you work, on call, how on call or shifts are scheduled, dress codes. So there's a whole slew of things that can be your terms and conditions of employment in addition to your wages or hours. And then what is a bargaining unit? A bargaining unit is a group of county employees that will be essentially joining a union. So they are the section in the statute cited there, 833.110 is the section of the statute that covers how to determine if something's an appropriate bargaining unit. So it's looking at really, is there sort of a community of interest there? Do they have common terms and conditions of employment? Things like that. So they're going to be looking through, and by they, I mean the Department of Labor and Employment that I'll talk about on the next slide. They will look through if there's a group of employees looking to be a bargaining unit or organize, and just ensuring that that makes sense. So they might look at it, and if it's a group of employees that have really very little in common besides the fact that they're county employees, they may not determine that that's an appropriate bargaining unit. So if you had, say, a couple of employees, and by that I mean maybe two from motor vehicle, you have two patrol deputies and two social caseworkers who want to form their own union of 6 people, the Department of Labor and Employment might say, you know what, that doesn't make sense. There's different elected officials involved. There's different rules. They work very different shifts and schedules. And so we don't think that's an appropriate bargaining unit. Whereas if, say, all of the employees in motor vehicle decided to organize, that probably does make sense because they have a similar level of terms and conditions of employment. They have similar hours they work in similar locations, similar dress code and rules. They have the same elected official over them, things like that. So a bargaining unit is just a unit that follows the rules outlined in the statute. And then there are 4 exclusions. So there are 4 groups of people that are not eligible to join a union. The first group is confidential employees. So these are employees that are advising the county, the Board of County Commissioners, or elected officials on confidential internal matters. So this would cover some HR employees, myself and Bridget, probably our HR generalists, because we deal with a lot of confidential employee issues. We're advising the Board of County Commissioners, elected officials on internal matters. A great example of this would be our county attorney, because they advise on a high level of confidential matters. So the people who fall into this category, it's a fairly narrow category. They will be considered to be confidential, and they will be excluded from bargaining. The second group is managerial employees. So a managerial employee is essentially someone at like a manager level or higher in most cases. So team leads, supervisors, shift supervisors, for the most part, are eligible for bargaining. It's just those higher level managers that can make high level decisions as to, their input in hiring and firing is strongly considered. They may have some input into jobs and job descriptions. They make decisions about discipline and things like that. So those managerial employees would potentially be excluded as well. The fourth group is executive employees, and this primarily covers the county manager, the assistant county manager, and our department heads. So again, very high level people who have the absolute decision to hire and fire, manage large budgets for their departments, things like that. And then the last group is temporary, intermittent, or seasonal employees. And this is employees who work less than 90 days in a 365-day period. So just our temp employees who are working less than those 90 days. Any temp or seasonal employees that work more than that could potentially be eligible to join a bargaining unit. All right, so the CDLE, you will hear me mention probably more than once, is the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. And probably most of you are familiar with the CDLE if you've ever had to file for unemployment. So they do a whole bunch of things. They're sort of an umbrella state agency that covers several areas. One of those is unemployment, deciding who is eligible for benefits and then administering that. They also have an arm that covers fair workplace laws. So they administer all of our equal employment opportunity laws in the state of Colorado. And then they have also been charged with labor rules for the private sector and for this new public sector bargaining for county employees. So they will be the ones overseeing and making rules. They will be the ones holding any hearings, solving disputes, running elections, and all that. So that's that. And then in a lot of places in the legislation, you will see the term the director. This is not the human resources director, not Bridget. This is actually the director of the Division of Labor and Employment. So the CDLE director is the one who makes a lot of decisions in regards to what the rules will be around collective bargaining. So the CDLE director will be determining how elections are run. They will be putting out the rules to determine what's an appropriate bargaining unit, and they'll ultimately be making decisions about what's an appropriate bargaining unit, et cetera. So anytime you see or hear the phrase the director, it's referring to the director of the state agency. Right. And then our final term that we'll go over is collective bargaining. So collective bargaining is basically the whole entire process that we'll be talking about. And it really means that there's just a mutual obligation when a bargaining unit is formed or a union group is formed. There's an obligation on that group, whoever is officially the exclusive representative or representing that group. And the county, they have a mutual obligation to meet at reasonable times and negotiate in good faith over those wages, hours, and terms and conditions of employment. So there is an obligation, regardless of how either side feels, to negotiate in good faith. In addition to that, they have to resolve any questions arising under an existing collective bargaining agreement or sort of the contract that the two of them reach. There will be a negotiated grievance process and potentially a final and binding arbitration for any disputes around that collective bargaining agreement. And then finally, they will be executing a written contract incorporating agreements reached. So in that process where once a bargaining unit is formed, they'll have somebody that is appointed as their elected or their exclusive representative that comes to the negotiating table with the county. And then they in the county will negotiate over whatever things matter to that bargaining unit. And then if they reach agreement on something, like say maybe they reach an agreement on having a 3% increase for wages over the next 2 years, then they will write that down in a contract and that will become their collective bargaining agreement. And then that agreement will govern the relationship between that bargaining unit and the county and how they interact and the employees that are covered in that unit. Okay, so how does all of this work? This is probably the number one question we're getting. How does this work? Do I have to join a union? Will I be forced into a union? Anything like that. So just some basics about how it all works. So as of July 1st, officially, employees will be able to meet and discuss with each other and any employee organizations during work hours and using county-owned communication channels and equipment. So what does this mean? It means that any employees interested in talking about forming a union or actually getting together and trying to form a union can do that. They can do it during working hours, but it needs to be reasonable. So you still got to get your work done. You can't be disrupting things. You can't be ignoring customers or clients during a time when you need to be working. But it does mean on work time or using county email or Zoom channels. You can discuss things and talk about it and say, we're interested in this or we're not interested in this. And employees can talk with each other about their ideas and thoughts around collective bargaining. So if there's a group of employees that decides they are interested in trying to form a union, those employees then have to work with their appointed union to try and collect signatures showing what's called a showing of interest. And so I'll just mention, for the most part, when employees are forming unions, they're working with existing state and national organizations. So you may be familiar with the terms AFL-CIO, Teamsters, IBU, AFSCME, some of the others. So kind of like the state wins, there are a bunch of organizations that exist already that look to unionize different types of groups of employees. Employees can form their own union. So if there was a group of employees that worked in a particular department or group of jobs, and they wanted to say, maybe all the payroll reps in the county want to form their own union, they could just band together. And instead of going to one of these outside organizations, they can just say, hey, we're going to form the payroll reps union. And then they will figure out how that works. And then they could come together and negotiate with the county. So whatever group is formed, then to be recognized as an employee organization or a bargaining unit, that union or employee organization has to collect signatures from 30% of the proposed bargaining unit. So for example, and I'll come back to this example several times, if you have a group of 50 employees that would potentially be a union, that means that you have to collect signatures from 15 people signing off saying that they're interested in joining that union. It used to be back in the day that they were always like a physical signature card that someone would be putting a physical signature on. But in large part today, they're electronic signatures. So there might be a document that someone would sign online saying, checking a box saying, I'm interested in joining a union. So once they collect those 15 signatures for my example group, then they will take those to the state agency, so CDLE, and basically say, hey, we have our 30% signatures. We're interested in moving forward and trying to form a bargaining unit. And then it's up to the director of the Department of Labor and Employment, to determine, number one, are there enough signatures? So do we have that 30%? And then number two, is the proposed bargaining unit an appropriate unit? For the most part, they're going to assume that it is. The county does have the opportunity to challenge it. So again, if you have a bunch of just random people with very little in common, the county would likely challenge that and say, this is going to be hard for us to administer and it doesn't make a lot of sense. But otherwise, if it's a group of people that have some things in common as far as job titles or departments they work in or job responsibilities, they'll probably be determined an appropriate bargaining unit. So if the director decides that it is an appropriate bargaining unit, the county then will be required to send notice to that entire proposed unit. So in my example, all 50 people need to get a notice from the county that there are employees interested in organizing. And one thing to know, and that will be important for yourselves, is that as soon as we receive that notice from the state, we have 10 days to turn around and provide contact information for all of those 50 or whatever the number is of employees to the employee organization or the union. And that includes not only work information, but also your personal information. So we will be required to turn over your personal email address, your cell phone number, and your home address. We've got a number of employees that are really concerned about that and are not comfortable with that information being provided. So we are working on an opt-out form that will be on our website, and we'll make sure that it's live before July 1st, because that's the first day that someone could put forth one of these showings of interest. So stay tuned. We will put out some information once that form is ready to go. The opt-out form will basically have some check boxes. So if you're comfortable with us providing, say, your personal email address, but you are not comfortable with us providing your home address, you can check the box and say, please don't provide my home address, but I'm okay with the email address. You can opt out of all. You can, if you don't do anything, then there's no opt-out. We'll provide your information. So if you're comfortable with that, you don't need to do anything. But if you do have a problem with that, then you'll just fill out the opt-out form and let us know. I would recommend doing that before July 1st if that's a concern for you, just so that you have that in place. And also know that if you ever change your mind, the opt-out form will also have basically a reversal on it, saying you are allowed to, or just saying, you know what, I'm okay with you providing information. And again, in reverse, you can say, I'm okay with you now providing my email address. So if you ever change your mind, you can change your election. All right. So once the unit is sort of blessed by the Department of Labor as being a solid unit and we can move forward with an election, then the director of the CDLE will set a date for the election. Typically, it will be within about 30 to 35 days from the receipt of the petition. So if, for example, July 1st, we received notice, we have some employees interested in organizing, they'll set that election probably around the beginning of August. So it's a fairly quick turnaround time. It's a secret ballot election, so you will be able to vote without any of your fellow employees knowing how you voted, so you can vote however you want. The director of the CDLE and his staff will be the ones who are reviewing how everyone voted. So the county won't know how you voted, and your coworkers won't know how you voted, and the union will not know how you voted. So it's completely up to you. They will keep that secret. And then, again, once we're notified of the election or the potential for the election, the union is allowed to campaign. So they can reach out to any of the employees in that proposed bargaining unit to sort of sell them on why they think a union would be beneficial to those employees. The county cannot expend any, funds or resources on advocating either for or against the union. So we will not be putting out any information beyond just neutral information. But the union can provide as much information as they would like. So also be aware of that. If you don't hear anything from the county beyond just here's when you can vote and please vote, it's simply because we're not allowed to do that under the legislation. All right. So when you get to the election, the employee organization will win if they get 50% plus one of those who voted. So it is important to know that it is not the majority of the people in the unit, is the majority of the people who voted. So going back to my 50-person unit, let's say there's 50 people and only 20 of them show up to vote. That means, however, 11 of them vote will be what determines it for the entire bargaining unit. So if 11 of them vote for a union, they're essentially opting into the union for all 50 people. If they vote no, they're making a decision against the union for all 50 people. So this is one reason why if you talk to us and ask us what you should do, we will encourage you to vote and make your voice heard and make the decision that is most appropriate for you. And there's basically two options. Either the union passes or the union fails. So if it fails, if they fail to get the 50% plus one, so in my example, 11 people vote no, that means no employee organization is formed. There is an opportunity for that organization to come back later. There's sort of a waiting period that they have to wait to come back and try again. Or another type of organization could come in and try to organize. So let's say the Teamsters tried to organize. Later, AFL-CIO could come in and try to do it. But ultimately, if it fails the vote, it fails at that point in time and no union is formed. And if it passes, that means there is a union formed that is covering the entire group of people that are considered to be the bargaining unit. So if they get the 50% plus one, the director of the CDLE then certifies that employee organization as the exclusive representative of the bargaining unit, saying this is the only organization that has the right to negotiate on behalf of this particular group of employees. So once it's been certified, then that means that the county and the employee organization are now obligated to come together and meet and negotiate and try to come up with a collective bargaining agreement. So again, they can negotiate over wages for employees, they can negotiate over hours and any of those other terms and conditions of employment. So all of those things will be up for bargaining and negotiation. So once the union and the county agree on certain things, then there's a vote that happens among the members of the bargaining unit. And again, it's all 50 people who will have the opportunity to vote, not just the people who voted yes or the people who are paying dues. So ultimately, whatever they agree on, the employees in that bargaining unit then have the opportunity to say, yes, we like what you've negotiated, we're voting in favor of that, or no, we don't like that, we want you to go back to the drawing board and negotiate again. So if they vote no, then they'll have to go back and renegotiate. Ultimately, it's the Board of County Commissioners that ratifies the agreement on behalf of the county. So the negotiating parties will likely be HR, maybe the county attorney's office, some county leaders, but the Board of County Commissioners are the ones that ultimately ratify that. The piece that's a little bit awkward is that they ratify on behalf of all elected officials. So if a bargaining unit, say, were formed in the sheriff's office, the county commissioners are the ones who ultimately say yes or no to that agreement. So our elected officials will have to figure out how to work together in that and how to just work out that relationship. So it's one thing that is a little bit odd about the way this bill works. And then one piece of information that's really important for you to know is, regardless of whether you voted in the election, regardless of whether you voted for or against the organization, regardless of whether you pay dues, if you are in the bargaining unit, you are now covered by those terms and conditions that were negotiated. So let's say that the collective bargaining agreement, they agreed to a 3% raise over the next 2 years each year, and you have a different disciplinary process than what we currently have in county policy. So if you didn't vote in the election, but you are in this bargaining unit of 50 people, you abide by the rules that are in the collective bargaining agreement, not the county policies, and you would be getting 3% per year for the next 2 years, regardless of what happens for the rest of the county. So this is one reason why we will encourage employees to vote, because if you don't vote, you're going to get stuck with whatever other people decide for you. And if there is a union formed, whatever's negotiated will impact your employment, and it could be different from the rest of the county. So regardless of whether you want that or not, that's what will be the case. So just be aware of that. All right. So that wraps up sort of my high level overview. If you want to know more, I mentioned that website that's on there. And I also saw that Jen Glover put that in the chat. So you're welcome to click on that link and check that out. So if you need resources, there's all kinds of information on there for you to see. And then if you have questions, you are welcome to reach out to your HR generalist, me, Bridget, Sarah, any and all of us. We're happy to help you with any questions. So I think that about covers all I had to say. So for those of you who were on at the beginning, if you have questions, please throw them in the chat, and Bridget will sort of moderate the chat and throw some questions my way, and we'll talk through those. So please ask any questions that you have.
So Christine, there was one in there, and I think you covered it right there at the end, right after it was asked. But again, just to reconfirm, if the union passes, and there are employees who don't want to be part of that union, can the employees in that union opt out from being part of the union in that unit?
Okay. So unfortunately, no. You will still be bound by whatever's negotiated in the collective bargaining agreement if you are deemed to be part of that unit. The one thing that we don't know 100%, but we believe the way that the law is written and the way some of the case law is, that you will be able to opt out of paying dues. We don't know that 100%, so we'll see when the regulations are finalized and just kind of how all of this develops. But we do believe that you will be able to opt out of paying dues, but you will still be covered by the agreement and still be considered part of the bargaining unit.
Great. Could you, this wasn't a question that was asked, but would you talk a little bit too about, since you brought it up, how dues are managed under the legislation? Because I think that's important for employees to understand the commitment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's important too. So if you are part of a bargaining unit and you would like to pay dues to the unit or to the union, the union determines how much they charge for dues. So if you're curious about a union that has approached you, you can always ask them what their dues are. Most unions on average charge about 1% to 2% of your wages. So that's what they'll be doing. The way that the legislation is written, if you opt into paying dues, we are obligated as a county to deduct those from your pay and to submit those directly to the union. So one thing that's important to know is once you opt into paying dues, you can't opt out for a year. So if your financial situation changes, you decide you don't like the union anymore, it's not worth your money, it's any other reason, you're basically kind of locked into paying dues for that year, and then you can opt out at the end of the year. And then the other piece to know is that once you've signed on with the union to pay dues, they basically just give us a list of employees that we need to deduct dues for and how much, and then we submit those to the union. If you feel like they've deducted too much or inappropriately, or there's any problems with that, you have to go to the union directly to work that out, because we don't have the legal authority to do any of that. So I'm sure our payroll will get questions, and they'll unfortunately not be able to help you. They're going to have to refer you on to the union.
Great. There were a couple questions from our last meeting that I thought were important to share. There were some questions about the type of employee and, whether limited term employees or grant funded employees would be covered. And the answer is yes, they have the eligibility to be part of a bargaining unit.
Yep.
Any other questions, Christine, you can think of from our last meeting that may have been helpful? We don't have more in the chat, so.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any more in the chat, and we'll give you just a minute or two if you're thinking about questions or wondering. And if you have individual questions you don't want to ask in the chat, you can always reach out to us afterward. I'm trying to think of some of the questions that they were asking yesterday, because there were some great questions that came out. There was one employee who asked me yesterday whether, I think there was some confusion around whether the bargaining unit makes decisions on behalf of an entire department, and they don't do that. So for example, I'll pick on our HR team. If our payroll team decided to organize and form a union, their collective bargaining agreement would cover them and their conditions of employment, but it would not impact the other HR employees. So my generalist team, the benefits team, they would all still operate under normal county policies, whatever wages are determined and things like that. So that would not be impacted. And then there was another question yesterday too with an employee who asked, do we have the opportunity to approach the county and, some of the things that a union would normally negotiate over, do I have the opportunity to talk with the county about that individually right now? And the answer is yes, you do. If you want to be reclassified, if you feel like the work that you're doing doesn't match with your current job description, if you feel like your pay is inappropriate for some reason, maybe you just found out a coworker who's been here less time than you is making more money than you, our doors are always open to that. So you're always welcome to approach your supervisor or contact your HR generalist to talk to us about that. If you run across a benefit that you think is really cool, you can always tell our benefits team about that because they're always looking for benefits to explore and potentially add. So if you run across anything that a union might normally negotiate around, you're always welcome as an individual to approach us, ask questions. If you need help with your supervisor, you can come to your HR generalist. If you think that your performance evaluation was not fair, there's a problem-solving process that you can work through and you can talk through it with your HR generalist. So there are a lot of opportunities to engage with HR and your supervisor if there's anything that you're struggling with over your employment.
All right. One good question I think that was more fiscal or budget based was in terms of, the question was, if we're already struggling with enough funding in our department to hire additional staff, where would the money come from if additional increases were promised from the employer organization? And if you think back to the process that Christine went through and talked about, the purpose of the legislation is just to negotiate, to talk about the terms and the conditions that the union's presenting on behalf of their employees, and that the commissioners have the authority to make that decision in that agreement. And so in terms of the fiscal impact, that's going to be one of the big considerations that the commissioners consider when we're working to reach an agreement. The goal is always an agreement, but really the legislation says, hey, you need to just, in good faith, try and reach an agreement. There are processes in place if the county and the employer organization are struggling to reach an agreement. And that was another question. What if agreement cannot be reached? And I'm going to hand that one over to Christine so she can talk about what that looks like.
Okay. So if the county is negotiating with the employer organization or the employee organization, we do have an obligation to negotiate in good faith. So one of the questions yesterday was, what if the county just doesn't want to deal with the employee organization? We really don't have that option. We have to come to the table and negotiate in good faith. However, if we negotiate and can't come to an agreement, there are some processes that are built into the statute for a mediation. So the county and the organization would have to go to a mediation to try and push us toward an agreement. And then if that doesn't work out, there's also a process through the CDLE where the county and the employee organization or union will present their sides, and then they make a decision or essentially a recommendation as to this is what we think you should agree to. But the county is still not bound by that. So, and the same goes for the union. We could all still reject that suggestion from them. And then no agreement is reached. So basically, there could just be a point in time where there's no agreement. Things are just kind of hanging out. The employees won't be terminated. I guess that was another question yesterday. The employees won't be terminated from the county. They'll continue on as county employees, very likely under the normal terms and conditions that have impacted them. And then there'll probably just be a break, and then we'll have to come back to the negotiating table at some point to try and come up with an agreement.
Thanks, Christine. There's another question that came in, kind of a clarification about what was discussed. If the bargaining unit through the CBA negotiates the 3% increase in wages over the next 2 years, but then the county was able to approve a 4%, the employees in the bargaining unit would not receive the 4%. They would receive their negotiated amount. And that is correct.
Yeah, exactly.
There are a lot of times you'll also see during negotiations or when agreements are trying to be reached that the union asks for a freeze on current benefits, pay, and terms and conditions of employment. And so that is a possibility. Essentially what happens is we end up working with 2 sets of rules or 3, or, however many different recognized groups of employees we have. and administering those. And the agreement sets the rules for what's offered to those employees, for wages, for benefits, for terms and conditions, and all of those pieces. Right, I'm pausing again. Oh, good, we got another one. We like questions in the chat because this is the fun part of the webinar. What if the employee voted no in the first place against the union and is not paying dues? The employees will still be affected by the above scenario?
Yes. Yeah. So going back to my 50-person example, if you're one of the 20 people that voted and you're one of the 10 people who voted no, you're still going to be covered by that collective bargaining agreement. So this is, again, why it's so important to vote, because you're going to be bound. If you're part of that group, you're going to be bound by whatever's decided, regardless of the outcome. So it's important to make your voice heard.
Perfect. Still pausing a little in case someone's typing. I scanned through those questions, Christine, from our last meeting, and I think we covered the bulk of them.
Cool. Well, the one thing I didn't mention at the beginning that Bridget and I were talking about is we wanted to make sure that you know that this is considered to be work time, sitting in on this webinar. So regardless of whether you're at work or not, please put this on your time card as work time. If you're not comfortable with that, do what you want, but we consider this to be paid working time.
Another really good question to help clarify the process. We would only be invited to vote if we expressed interest in being part of the bargaining unit, though, correct?
That is a great clarification. So no, if you are not one of the going back to my example, if you are not one of the 15 or 20 or however many signed the card, you still get to vote. So all 50 of those people get to vote regardless of whether or not you signed off. So everybody who will be impacted by the bargaining unit, potentially if one is formed, has the opportunity to vote. So it doesn't matter whether you have signed a card, anything else, you still get to vote. Give you another few minutes to think and type, and we'll see.
And again, we've got some information out on the website. We're going to make this presentation available to you. And Jen in our office did a great job with these graphics. And the graphics that have built the presentation, we're also going to put together on PDF documents so that it's all kind of collected in one place. So again, appreciate you guys taking some time with us tonight. And, we hope it was helpful. Oh, good. One more. All right. So if my department decided they wanted to look into this and I decided I didn't want to participate in this, even if the people who vote choose to move forward with it, then I'm automatically included in that bargaining unit and bound by their decisions.
Yes.
Oh, I missed.
Yeah, good one.
One. Hold on a second.
Okay.
Okay. You can go ahead for that one. I'll follow up on the other one. But yes, you will be bound to the terms if it's recognized. So remember, there's a couple steps. If your department is in the union that's representing says that the department is the qualifier, that could make it 75 people. And so then they have to get that 30% for the CDLE to say, okay, we agree with your group. Now we're going to go back and let those 75 people vote to make a decision. And when those 75 people vote, let's say only 50 show up to vote of the 75, but 26 say yes. All 75 will be bound by the rules of the 26 votes. So again, what we'd love to see, and we're going to say it over and over, is regardless of your decision, you need to show up and have your voice heard, right? I want to see all 75 people show up because it's important that you have a say in, recognizing it could go either way depending on your vote, but then your contribution has been collected. Again, those votes go to CDLE. Let's see, Kim put in, sorry, I'm reading names. I'm sure everyone can see it because it goes to everyone. Would program coordinators, for example, at BHS, be in the same bargaining unit as public health? It's possible, right? So if the organization is, I'm going to pick on not just program coordinators, but let's do accounting techs, because that even hits more departments than program coordinators. If there is an employee organization that would like to represent accounting techs, they could grab accounting techs from all across the county, and that would be the group of employees that they would try and then get certified through the state as a unit. So it could cross department lines, it could be job-based, it could be type of work-based. It could be a frontline service employees. So it could pick up my motor V, it could pick up my intake at human services. It could take, like we could have, the organization could propose whatever commonality that they would like in order to group employees. I hope that helps. And sorry, I'm at home, we're in the evening. I apologize if you hear children in the background. Christine, I got another one down here. I'm sorry I missed the first half of your presentation. Will each individual department be talking to their employees outside of this presentation?
It's possible. I don't know. Each department will be a little bit different. Some departments may mention collective bargaining. They all have different comfort levels with this, but I think a lot of them will be deferring to HR. So if you miss the beginning of the presentation, you just by registering for this, you will be getting the recording from this. So you're welcome to watch the recording after you're done. We're also having another one at 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. So if you'd like to register for that one, you can do that. Or you can also ask questions or set up some time with your HR generalist to chat through things. So you're welcome to do that. But if you have questions of your department, of how it will impact you or what information there will be, you're certainly welcome to reach out to your supervisor or your department head to find out more.
And we hope to do another presentation probably in May, because there was some rulemaking that we were waiting on from CDLE, because they control certain pieces of this process, and they essentially create processes associated with their responsibilities. And we got some of that proposed rulemaking last week, I think, was when we first saw it. And there's some feedback time. And then after that, it'll get finalized. So once that's finalized, we'll do another round with a little bit more detail on the process and more information as we know it.
Okay, we'll give it just another couple minutes for anybody to type any other questions that you may have.
right. I'm not seeing anything else. That doesn't mean you can't have questions answered any longer. Please feel free to reach out to your generalist, Christine, myself, email us directly with some questions you have. Again, we've recorded the webinars and we'll get those published. I know we're meeting next, Jen and I for sure are meeting next week to kind of go through next steps about where we get information out and getting the website updated too. So I'm going to give everybody like another 30 seconds and then we'll call it.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks to you all for your interest and your great questions. And so we're really appreciative that so many of you are so engaged.
Great. Well, thanks everyone. It looks like I've got some people dropping off too that they're done. We appreciate you taking some time with us tonight.
Yep.
Thank you. Have a good night. Good job, Christine.